My name is Nathan. I'm 38, and I've been married to my wife, Kelly, for 12 years. We met in college during my junior year. She was the outgoing type, the one who could walk into any room and make friends instantly. I was more reserved, the guy who double-checked the numbers and stayed late to finish the group project. Kelly once joked that she had to rescue me from spreadsheets. It wasn't far from the truth. She had this energy about her that pulled me in, a kind of confidence that felt like sunlight on your skin. The early years of our relationship were effortless, like we were two pieces of a puzzle snapping perfectly into place. She was the spontaneous one, always planning last-minute weekend trips, while I provided the grounding influence, ensuring we didn't go broke funding her whims. Together, we balanced each other out. But lately it feels like something has shifted. Maybe it started last year, when Kelly took on more responsibilities at work. She's a real estate agent, and with the market booming, her schedule became unpredictable. Initially, I didn't think much of it. Real estate comes with odd hours, and Kelly has always thrived on being busy. Then, the late nights began to pile up. At first, it was occasional. Then, it became a regular occurrence. Family dinners turned into me eating alone, and our long-standing Friday movie nights fell by the wayside. When I teased her one evening about her new workaholic lifestyle, she brushed it off with a quick smile and a promise that things would settle soon. I wanted to believe her, but small inconsistencies began to emerge. One night, she came home much later than she'd said she would. When I asked how her day went, she mumbled something vague about a last-minute showing. The ease with which she answered didn't sit right with me. Kelly had always been an open book, but now it felt like there were entire chapters one couldn't access. The first real red flag came on a Sunday. Kelly was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but this time, the screen lit up with a calendar notification. Lunch with SM. I remember staring at it, confused. Kelly had told me she was meeting her friend Molly for lunch that day. Molly wasn't someone whose initials matched SM. For the first time, I felt a gnawing sense of doubt. Who was SM? And why hadn't she mentioned this? When I casually asked her later how lunch went, she gave me a vague answer about Molly's plans for an upcoming vacation. It didn't add up, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Kelly had never given me a reason not to trust her before. But after that, I started noticing more. Kelly would angle her phone away when she texted. She started taking calls in the bedroom with the door shut, something she never used to do. On one occasion, I walked into the room while she was on her laptop, and she quickly minimized whatever she was looking at. Each small moment felt like a drop in an invisible bucket, slowly filling with unease. One evening, I tried to joke about it. "You and your phone are practically inseparable these days," I said lightly. She laughed but didn't respond, and the air between us felt heavier than it should have. Then came the night that changed everything. Kelly said she was meeting a colleague after work for drinks. It seemed innocent enough, but a part of me decided to swing by the bar where she said she'd be. It wasn't something I'd ever done before, but the doubt had grown louder in my head. When I got there, she wasn't sitting with a colleague. She was tucked into a corner booth with a man I didn't recognize. They were leaning in close, their conversation animated, and Kelly's laugh carried across the room, a laugh I hadn't heard in months. I didn't confront her. Instead, I turned around and left, my chest tight and my mind racing. When she came home that night, she acted like nothing was amiss. She asked about my evening, kissed me on the cheek, and went to bed as if everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Not anymore. I spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife and our life together. The weekend following that strange night at the bar, Kelly had plans to attend her friend Amy's bachelorette party. She was buzzing with excitement all week, shopping for the perfect dress and texting nonstop with the other bridesmaids about the details. I tried to be supportive, even though I was still processing what I'd seen. On the night of the party, Kelly came downstairs wearing a sleek black dress that hugged her in all the right places. She spun around, grinning. "What do you think?" "Too much." I smiled, though my chest ached. "You look incredible." They'll forget about the bride once you walk in. She laughed, leaning in to kiss me. You're sweet. Don't wait up for me, okay? It'll probably be late. The evening passed uneventfully. I flipped through channels, ordered takeout, and fell asleep on the couch. It wasn't until I heard the faint creak of the front door that I woke up. I glanced at the clock. Just after 2 a.m. Kelly stepped inside, her laughter soft and slightly slurred, her hair tousled in a way that suggested more than just dancing. She kicked off her heels and waved a hand. Don't mind me. It was a wild night, she said with a grin. Good time? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Oh yeah, she replied, her voice breezy. Amy had a blast. She headed upstairs, and I followed a few minutes later, but something didn't sit right with me. As she undressed to get ready for bed, I noticed something odd. She wasn't wearing the underwear I'd seen her put on earlier. In fact, she wasn't wearing any at all. It felt like a punch to the gut, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind raced, replaying the night over and over, wondering if I'd missed some explanation. By the time Kelly drifted off to sleep, I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of my suspicions suffocating. The next morning, Kelly was her usual self, bright and cheerful, sipping her coffee and chatting about the party. She seemed completely at ease, as if nothing had changed. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the image of her slipping out of that dress the night before. Later that day, while she was getting ready to leave for an open house, she left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but this time, I couldn't resist. My heart pounded as I picked it up and unlocked it. Her messages were mostly innocuous, group chats with friends, reminders from her office, but then I saw a thread with someone named SM. My stomach dropped. The messages were sparse, but they felt intimate in a way that was unmistakable. Asterisk, you looked amazing last night. Asterisk, I scrolled up, my hands trembling. Asterisk, wish we had more time. Asterisk, I couldn't breathe. There were mentions of meetings, vague references to catching up, and even a note about something she'd left behind at his place. It was all too much. I felt like I was seeing my marriage unravel in real time. And yet, part of me needed more. I found her calendar app and scrolled through recent entries. There it was, another lunch with SM at a time she'd told me she was out running errands. I put the phone back exactly as I'd found it, my heart racing. When Kelly returned home that evening, she was her usual bubbly self, chatting about her day and asking what I wanted for dinner. I tried to act normal, but the weight of what I'd discovered sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed more information, more clarity. But every interaction with her felt like walking on eggshells, even if she didn't seem to notice. The cracks in our marriage were growing wider, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending everything was fine. I spent the next week in a haze of confusion and doubt. Every time Kelly chuckled at her phone or casually mentioned working late, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Despite my growing unease, I could not bring myself to confront her yet. I needed more than vague messages and unexplained calendar entries. I needed undeniable truth. One evening, Kelly mentioned that she was meeting a colleague for drinks to discuss a property. Her casual tone only deepened my suspicions, making her explanation feel like another layer of deceit. Determined to ease my mind, or confirm my fears, I decided to follow her. Parking a block away from the bar she had mentioned, I waited in tense anticipation. After a short while, I saw her walk in, looking effortlessly elegant in a fitted blouse and jeans. She bypassed the main seating area and headed straight to a dimly lit booth in the back. There, a man was already seated, his arm draped casually along the back of the booth. It was him, the man from the other night. SM was no longer a mystery. For a fleeting moment, I contemplated storming in and demanding answers, but the sight of them leaning in close, laughing, and sharing a world that no longer included me left me paralyzed. My breath caught, and instead of confronting them, I turned and left, gripping the steering wheel tightly as my hands trembled. Later that night, Kelly returned home and acted as if nothing was amiss. She described her meeting in vague terms, kissed me as though everything was fine, and went to bed. Meanwhile, I sat in the living room, my mind awash with anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, unable to focus on anything but the image of her with him. The next day, driven by the need for clarity, I decided to visit Maggie, one of Kelly's closest friends. When I showed up at her door unannounced, Maggie greeted me with surprise but allowed me in. As we sat down, I hesitated, unsure how to approach the topic. Eventually, I asked if Kelly had mentioned anything unusual about her work or colleagues recently. Maggie's expression changed, a flicker of discomfort crossing her features. She seemed reluctant to speak, glancing away and fidgeting with her hands. Her response was guarded, suggesting that if I had doubts, I should address them directly with Kelly, as it was not her place to interfere. Though her words were neutral, her unease confirmed my worst fears. Thanking her for her time, I left her house more resolved than ever to confront Kelly and get the truth. That evening, as Kelly walked through the door with her usual cheerful demeanor, I was waiting for her. Her bright smile faltered when she noticed my serious expression, and she asked cautiously how my day had been. Ignoring her question, I immediately demanded to know who Sam was, the man she had been meeting for lunch and spending time with at the bar. The color drained from her face as she froze, unable to respond immediately. When she finally did, her words were hesitant and filled with stammers. She admitted that Sam Mitchell was a client who had become more than that. She described their time together as a mistake born out of loneliness, claiming that she had felt invisible in our marriage and had made a terrible choice. Her confession felt like a blow to the chest. She cried as she spoke, apologizing repeatedly and insisting that the affair had ended. However, her apologies did little to soothe the storm of anger and disbelief swirling inside me. I told her how deeply she had betrayed me and questioned why I should trust anything she said now. Kelly had no real answer, and we sat in heavy silence, the weight of her betrayal forming an unbreachable wall between us. That night, I moved into the guest room, though sleep eluded me. My mind was a battlefield of questions. How long had this been happening? How many lies had she told to keep it hidden? Most of all, I wondered if our marriage could ever recover, or if it was already beyond repair. I did not have the answers yet, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The days following Kelly's confession were some of the hardest of my life. I went through a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sorrow, confusion, all cycling through me like a storm that would not let up. I could not focus at work, so I took a few days off. Every quiet moment was filled with the weight of what I now knew. At first, I tried to stay in the same house, but the tension was unbearable. Kelly acted like she was walking on eggshells around me, and every time I looked at her, I felt a mix of love for the woman I thought I knew and bitterness toward the stranger who had betrayed me. One evening, I sat alone in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed. It was my best friend Josh. We had not spoken much recently, but I knew I needed someone to talk to. Without hesitation, I answered. "Hey man," he said, "I've been worried about you. Everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "Not really," I admitted. She was seeing someone else. There was silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "Oh, Nathan, I'm so sorry." Hearing those words, I finally broke down. I told him everything: the texts, the calendar entries, the night she said she was working but was with him. By the end of it, my voice was shaky and my hands were trembling. "Have you thought about talking to someone?" Josh asked gently. "A therapist? Or even a marriage counselor?" "I do not know," I replied honestly. "Part of me wants to fix this, but another part of me wonders if it is even worth trying." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Whatever you decide, just know I am here for you." That night, I started researching therapists. I did not know if it would help, but I needed something to anchor me, some way to navigate the mess I was in. A few days later, I sat in the office of Dr. Ellis, a calm and collected woman who seemed to see right through my defenses. The first session was hard. I hated talking about my feelings, hated admitting how broken I felt. But as I opened up, a small part of the weight lifted. "It is not your fault," Dr. Ellis said firmly. "Kelly made her choices. That does not mean you failed." Her words stayed with me, even as I struggled to believe them. Meanwhile, Kelly was doing everything she could to make amends. She apologized repeatedly, her tears a constant reminder of her guilt. She insisted the affair was over and that she wanted to rebuild our marriage. But every time she reached out to touch my hand or said she loved me, I felt a wall between us. I spent more and more time away from home, taking long drives to clear my head. One afternoon, I found myself parked outside a small house in a quiet neighborhood. It was Sam's house. I had looked up the address after finding it on one of Kelly's calendar entries. I was not sure why I was there. Maybe I wanted answers, or maybe I just wanted to see the man who had played such a pivotal role in upending my life. I stayed in the car for a long time, watching as kids played in the yard and a woman, who I assumed was Sam's wife, stepped outside to call them in for dinner. It struck me how normal they looked, how blissfully unaware his family seemed of the chaos he had caused in mine. The anger I felt was overwhelming. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, then drove away without confronting him. The following week, Dr. Ellis helped me focus on what I could control. "You cannot change the past," she said, "but you can decide what you want your future to look like. Whether that includes Kelly or not is up to you." I started journaling, pouring my thoughts onto paper in an attempt to make sense of them. It was not a solution, but it helped. Slowly, I began to see a path forward, even if it was not yet clear where it would lead. One night, Kelly sat across from me at the dinner table. Her eyes were red from crying. "Nathan, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, and I hate myself for it. But I need to know if there is any chance for us. Can we try to fix this?" I stared at her, my heart heavy. Part of me wanted to say yes, to believe that we could go back to what we once had. But another part of me knew the trust we had built over 12 years was shattered, and no amount of effort could fully repair it. "I do not know," I said finally. I need time." Her face crumpled, but she nodded. "Take as much time as you need," she whispered. As the days turned into weeks, I focused on rebuilding myself. I took long walks, reconnected with friends, and even signed up for a woodworking class, something I had always wanted to try. Little by little, I began to feel like my old self again. But the question of whether I could forgive Kelly still loomed, and I knew I could not avoid it forever. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. Kelly had gone out to run errands, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That solitude had become a constant companion lately, and while it was lonely, it also gave me clarity. I pulled out the small journal I had been writing in since this all began. It was a mixture of raw emotions, questions I still did not have answers to, and moments of self-reflection. Flipping through its pages, I saw how far I had come in just a few short weeks. But one question stared back at me, written in bold letters. Can I ever truly trust her again? As much as I wanted to repair what we had, I kept circling back to that question. Trust, once broken, does not easily mend. And even if I could forgive her, I could not ignore the nagging feeling that would haunt me every time she came home late or her phone buzzed with a notification. That afternoon, something happened that pushed me toward a decision. I was out grocery shopping, mindlessly scanning the shelves, when I saw her, Sam's wife. She was standing in the produce section, holding an apple in one hand and a shopping list in the other. Her expression was distant, almost like she was lost in her own thoughts. I hesitated, unsure whether to approach her. She probably would not recognize me, but I felt an inexplicable pull to say something. Before I knew it, I was walking toward her. "Excuse me," I said softly. "You are Sam's wife, right?" She turned to me, her brows furrowing slightly. Yes, and you are? Nathan, I said, offering a small, awkward smile. Kelly's husband. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by something else, fear, maybe, or sadness. Oh, she said quietly. I see. There was a long, uncomfortable pause before I said, I think we should talk. We ended up sitting at a small cafe a few blocks away, neither of us touching the drinks we ordered. Emily, as I learned her name was, seemed nervous but curious. I explained as delicately as I could why I had approached her, sharing my suspicions about Kelly and Sam. Her face fell. I had a feeling, she admitted, her voice trembling. Sam has been distant lately, coming home late, making excuses. I did not want to believe it, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. We talked for over an hour, piecing together what we knew. Emily told me about the second phone Sam had gotten for work and how he had been evasive about his schedule. I shared the messages I had seen on Kelly's phone and the nights she had lied about where she was. By the end of our conversation, it was clear. The affair was not a fleeting mistake, but a sustained betrayal. Before we parted, Emily looked at me with tear-filled eyes. What are you going to do? I do not know yet, I admitted. But I think this conversation just helped me figure it out. That evening, I sat down with Kelly at the dining table. She looked uneasy, sensing that something was coming. Nathan, she began, her voice tentative, is everything okay? No, I said plainly. It is not. I took a deep breath and continued. I ran into Emily today. Sam's wife. Her face went pale. You talked to her? Yes, I said firmly. We talked. She knows about the affair, Kelly. And now, so do I. Kelly's shoulders slumped, tears immediately welling up in her eyes. Nathan, Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. I have heard your apologies. I know you feel guilty, and maybe you are genuinely sorry. But this is not just about you. It is about the lies, the betrayal, and the trust you shattered. She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I want to fix this, she choked out. I love you, Nathan. I made a terrible mistake, but I want to make it right. Her words hung in the air, but I could feel the distance between us, an invisible wall that no amount of tears or promises could tear down. I do not think I could do this anymore, I said quietly. I need to move on, Kelly, for my own sanity. Her sobs grew louder, but I forced myself to stay calm. I will make arrangements to move out, I said, my voice steady but heavy with finality. We could talk about the details later. That night, I packed a bag and left. Driving away from the house we had shared for over a decade felt surreal, like closing the door on a life I could no longer live. But as painful as it was, I knew it was the right decision. I stayed with Josh for a few weeks while I looked for an apartment. He was a constant source of support, listening when I needed to vent and reminding me that I was stronger than I thought. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The divorce process was not easy, but it was necessary. Kelly and I kept things civil, dividing our assets without much conflict. Still, every time I saw her signature on a document, it felt like another wound opening up. By the time everything was finalized, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was not the ending I had hoped for, but it was the one I needed. After the divorce was finalized, I moved into a modest apartment a few miles from my old neighborhood. It was smaller than the house Kelly and I had shared, but it felt like mine, a blank slate where I could start fresh. The first few weeks were difficult. Everywhere I went, reminders of my old life lingered. A familiar song on the radio, a favorite restaurant on the corner, even the scent of fresh-cut grass would bring back memories of us. But little by little, I began to reclaim my days, filling them with small routines that brought me peace. One of the first things I did was adopt a dog, a scrappy little terrier mix I named Rusty. He had a way of bounding through the apartment with boundless energy, chasing after his own tail and barking at shadows. Rusty was my anchor, pulling me out of my head when the memories threatened to take over. His wagging tail greeted me every evening, a reminder that life could still have moments of pure, unfiltered joy. I also decided to take a woodworking class at the local community center. It was something I had always been curious about, but had never found the time for. At first, my projects were simple: a crooked birdhouse, a wobbly stool, but the process of creating something tangible with my hands felt therapeutic. With each plank I sanded, each nail I drove in, I felt a little more grounded. Over time, I began to reflect on the relationship that had defined so much of my adult life. Kelly's betrayal had shattered me, but in its aftermath, I started to see the cracks that had been there all along. I had spent years trying to be the perfect husband, bending over backward to meet her needs, but I had lost pieces of myself in the process. One evening, while walking Rusty in the park, I ran into Emily. She was sitting on a bench, watching her two kids play on the swings. She smiled when she saw me and waved me over. We talked for a while, catching up on how things had unfolded since our last conversation. She told me that she had confronted Sam and, like me, had chosen to end her marriage. It was hard, she said, her voice steady but reflective. But it was the right choice. For me and for the kids. Hearing her say that, I felt a sense of camaraderie. We had both been through the same storm, and though we had emerged on the other side battered and bruised, we were still standing. As the months went by, I found myself smiling more often. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined me. I began to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage, a man who loved long hikes, terrible action movies, and the quiet satisfaction of a well-made bookshelf. One day, while cleaning out some old boxes, I came across an anniversary card Kelly had given me years ago. In it, she had written about how much she admired my steadiness, my loyalty, and my kindness. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the life we had shared. But as I closed the card and set it aside, I realized that those qualities were still mine. They had not disappeared with the end of our marriage. If there is one thing I have learned through all of this, it is the importance of listening to your own needs. For years, I ignored the little cracks in our relationship, convincing myself they were just part of marriage. But cracks are not just flaws. They are signs that something needs attention. Letting go of Kelly was one of the hardest decisions I have ever made, but it also freed me to focus on myself. I'm not the same person I was before the betrayal, and I think that is a good thing. I am stronger now, more self-aware, and more willing to fight for my own happiness. Every now and then, a memory of Kelly surfaces, a song, a scent, a fleeting thought, but it no longer has the power to undo me. Those memories are part of my past, but they do not control my future. I am writing this now to remind myself and anyone else who might be going through something similar that there is life after heartbreak. It may not be the life you envisioned, but it can still be beautiful, fulfilling, and uniquely yours. So here I am, sitting in my little apartment, Rusty snoring softly at my feet, with the scent of fresh sawdust in the air from my latest project. For the first time in a long time, I feel content. Kelly is not the center of my story anymore. I am. And you know what? That feels pretty damn good. If you were in my shoes, would you have tried to rebuild the relationship, or would you have walked away like I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.